I have the honor to introduce and moderate two very probably interesting people doesn't give service to who you are. John Waters, writer, novelist, former journalist, a man I've had the pleasure to actually read many of the things that you've read in life, that you've written in life, and I'm actually very jealous of it. I'm jealous of people who have the capacity to put into writing what they think, because I don't, and I always have that jealousy. And also with a very strong intuition about what are the difficult situation in which we live today, what are the difficulties that we tackle with, in particular being an Irish in Ireland, what it means. When I've read the things that you've written, I always get this sense of someone who has a great love for life and for humanity, but for your own humanity, what it means for you to be human, and deal with living in today's world and responding to the challenges there that we face. We also have Michael Beilstein, professor. I always think of Michael, theologian, a great thinker that actually got his PhD into Harvard, which I always have the curiosity to know what is it that you got out of that beautiful institution. Having the two of you here is the possibility for us to explore the theme of this encounter. The theme of our meeting now for the next 55 minutes is reality has not betrayed me, really, because it puts forth a very interesting provocation. We all have the intuition that there is something beautiful in our life, something beautiful that is promised to us, but the idea that this may not happen fills us with fear in many ways. The idea that it may happen is also mysterious in itself. So just to jump into it right away, I wanted to ask the two of you, John first, when you heard the theme of this New York encounter, reality does not betray me, what came out to you? What came to your mind? And especially with this word reality, because I think it's, in as much as it tries to define something very particular, it's a very abstract word. So what is reality does not betray me for you?
Well, just as we came up there, I don't want to give away the secrets of the trade, but you whispered that the first question would be that question, what is reality? and
this is as much preparation we had. That was
for about 20 seconds, I actually thought, I don't know the answer to that question. I said, that's the only question that I haven't thought about over the last 6 months since I was asked to do this. Do I know what reality is? And I said, and this is really central to the problem of reality, because there's a false reality and there's a reality. And so, if you asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have said, well, everything in the world is a reality, isn't it? Which isn't very helpful. But no, and then after those 20 terrified seconds, then it came to me. Reality is what I meet on the path that I'm on. It's when it's the real path, when it's the right path, that is reality. Reality is what is given to me. Circumstances, gifts, signs, which are the cues and the clues that take me along that path towards my destiny. And that's the key to it then, is this, because we have this sense that reality is everything. And that's one of the pathologies of the modern world. There are all these pathologies which we're not aware of in our culture. And that's one of the key ones. that everything randomly thrown at us is whatever that's what we must play. It's like a football match. Whatever happens, but that there's no order and it's random. This idea that everything is random. But actually, and this is the problem. In that false reality, you think it's real. And you find it impossible to argue or even think your way out of it. Because if somebody, I can have a conversation in the world about this, and we can talk for hours about this question of randomness. I'm in New York, but I might not be. I might be in Dublin. I could be in London. I could be in India. And that's, and that undermines everything that happens. That underpins everything that happens. That's in our culture. That all the time we're being worked on by that kind of loosening idea, which sort of loosens us from any kind of concrete, specific relationship with what is on that path. And it's very hard to appear to be rational while saying that that's unreasonable, while saying that that's wrong. But it is wrong. And it is wrong in the sense that there is no specificity about the random. There is no specificity about the idea that I might be somewhere else because I'm not. The fact of my New Yorkness at this moment is absolute. I cannot argue with it. I should not argue with it. I should not allow it to be undermined in me as I sit here. I am in New York and there is no accident about it. It is true and nothing else is true in that sense of me. So that path in reality is a concrete path, as it were. Not literally, of course. Sometimes it's a concrete path. Sometimes it's gravel. Sometimes it's dirt, earth. We could go on, tiles. But it's concrete and it's specific and it's given. This is the thing I learned from Giussani that really astonished me. I said, can this be true? Can this be true? Is he really saying that these circumstances are given to me one by one as a series of challenges on the path towards my destiny? That is what my life is. And I would say my experience as of today tells me, yes, that is true.
What came to your mind?
What I thought of first was in 1981, when I began studying in Rome. 2 of our children were born there, now we have 8. We went to Santa Maria in Trastevere to the Mass of the Movement, and I was blown over by a pervasive presence of joy among people there. I hadn't run into a group before in which joy was so pervasive. That's the first thing I thought of. And then I thought of Father Giussani. In '84, he sent some people over to the United States, and that was just the year we moved from Italy, my wife and I, to the United States. And he came over in those first few years a number of times, and I was usually the person to translate for him, so I had a chance to observe him from close up, and was amazed by the same thing in him, an incredible positivity and joy, not put on as a facade behind which dreadful things could be going on, but real. That's to see this instantiated really struck me. all the more so because our world is one in which sadness, and this is something we need to think about very carefully, I think. And yesterday evening in our conversation, which was fantastic, you said some very illuminating things about it. Why is it that in our age in particular, sadness is so pervasive?
It's interesting because putting those two things together, and I have a question here, is because the first thing that you said, John, is that we've lost, if I understood, we've lost touch with the concreteness of things and people, even the place where we are. So like as if they are accidents that are not having a particular, not that they may have an effect or not, but that they are, no? Because I had these two questions that come here. One is whether this sense of givenness of reality comes out of the fact that you get to concretely experience it. Yeah. In other words, the more aware I am that I am here with you, the more I come to realize the fact that I am here, I'm not somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of givenness and connecting what we are saying, Michael, and also of gratitude that I'm here. Whereas in the world today, if I were to be a good millennial, which I'm not by age, I would actually be thinking about all of the things that I'm missing by being here and not elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. Milan Kundera, the Czech writer, had a book called Life is Elsewhere. And this is really almost like a definition of the condition that we suffer from, that wherever we are, it's not quite the place that we want it to be, that we ought to be, that we feel is the center of everything. And that, there's a real kind of that isn't a random condition. That's, I think, a culturally orchestrated condition. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy or anything like that, but it's the way that cultures organically develop in certain circumstances, arising from all kinds of forces like pessimism and skepticism and positivism. All these different kind of elements create this culture in which nothing is concrete. A related syndrome is the idea that, when you argue about, when you get into an argument with an atheist about faith, one of the first questions that is lobbed at, or assertions that is lobbed at you says, well, the only reason you're a Christian, a Catholic, is because you're from Ireland. If you had been born in India, you would be a Hindu. If you had been in Iraq, you would be a Sunni Muslim. If you had been in Japan, you would have been a Buddhist. So there's nothing definitive about your Catholicism or Christianity. It's an accident. And that seems persuasive because we're in the culture that has generated it and we're all infected by the thinking. And it seems, in fact, that it's impossible to think our way out of that using the normal logics and words that are given to us, as it were, in the culture. But in fact, when you go to the end of the purpose, as it were, of this maneuver and ask yourself, well, what is the net, what would be the consequence, what would be the end result if this gambit was successful with me or with anybody? It would be basically, it wouldn't be to transfer my loyalty from Christianity to Hinduism or to Buddhism. It would be to disintegrate my sense of a specific loyalty to anything, any faith, any belief system, because the same logic would be simultaneously applied to the Hindu and the Buddhist and the Sunni Muslim in their own places. So the purpose of this culturally is to disintegrate belief. It isn't to say you have the wrong belief. It's just to say any belief will be attacked. And that's kind of part of it. And that's what unsettles us so profoundly. Even those of us who have beliefs that we can articulate and tabulate and create an architecture of within our intelligence and so on. We're unsettled all the time, rattled by what appears to be the implausibility of this based on their apparent randomness, accidental nature, among other things. So, and this is just one of the pathologies that I've identified in this world, which I've thought about a lot in the last few years, because Pope Benedict in 2011 made a speech which I've bored everybody to death talking about ever since in the Bundestag in Berlin. And I call it the bunker speech, where he talked about the bunker that man has built for himself to live in. And the idea of that bunker is that it has closed out the mystery. And it has created a space in which man is master, because he knows everything. He is omniscient. He's all-powerful within that space. Because there is no, he thinks there is no mystery to challenge him, to discomfort him, forgetting that the mystery is not just out there, it's also in here. And in a way, this could be deemed a definition of our core condition, that we're trying to exclude God, but we cannot exclude God because he's in here. And there's a marvelous quote from a Spanish writer. I just hope I can just put my finger on it now, right now, because it's amazing. He talks about this. Juan Miguel de Prada, I don't know if you know him.
No, I don't.
He's really interesting. He's a convert. He talks about our society searches for happiness as if it were morphine. You take it and you achieve a sense of well-being. But man is not a chain of molecules. Man is made for complete happiness. Once man has cut God out of his existence, he is an amputee, like one missing an arm. We feel there is something missing, so we try to anesthetize ourselves with the most disparate pleasures. And then this is the amazing sentence. Well, you hear, thank God, though, the pain does not go away. Mm-hmm. It is the only way through which contemporary man can avoid falling into the falsity of godless celebration. Thank God that the pain does not go away. So here we have what appears to be the symptom, the consequence, the horrific consequence of our godlessness is that we are all pathologized. We are all, to the extent that we have conspired or colluded with this, we are all really self-harming. But, and so, that might be in a sort of therapeutic sense, you might think that is the problem that needs to be fixed, this pain. And he says, no, the pain is the good news. The pain is the good news. The pain is what reminds me of what I have actually done and will not leave me until I restore the order of my life, which means restoring my relationship with God. Pope Benedict I think Joseph Ratzinger talked about this, the idea that the problem with man having made himself dissimilar from God, was that he also at the same time made himself dissimilar from himself, and therefore could no longer have a relationship with himself, could no longer recognize himself. This is kind of what we're talking about. All these pathologies are coming to bear to bring this. And this is what I say about the false reality. The false reality, which does betray, is by definition a betrayal of man. But reality is there all the time, to be found if we can go back to the source and begin again the journey. Each day we begin the path again. And each day, miraculously, we can start and find the right path on that day, as if for the first time.
There is one thing that when I think of death, not death in general, but of my death, and therefore I'm reminded of something that you are saying right now, and it is the concreteness of my person. Like the fact that I'm getting old, that I don't hear anymore, that I don't see anymore, is this, in a sense, suffering because I don't see anymore the computer and I have to put my head in it, basically.
Yeah.
It actually makes me aware of the fact that I am concrete. So this sense of abstraction in which we live in, that you are mindful of.
That's very interesting, yes. And it occurs to me as you say that actually, yes, that always in man's journey was the way that encroachingly the pain reminded man that the journey was shortening, that the distance ahead was less than the distance behind. All of that was. What we notice about our culture now is that this happens so much younger for many people because of all of the different pathologies, whether it's violence, addiction, self-harm, all of these pathologies which are relatively, new in the sense that they're generalized rather than occasional. And so to me, that is the crisis defined in a way, in a different way, that we have now, even as young people, the pain, that reminder kicks in so much younger. You don't get, for many people, young people, they don't get the same run at it that we had. My life was defined by alcoholism at an early age. So in a sense, that's part of the pain that I encountered. And that was the pain that didn't go away until I fixed that. That happens, it is now a very general experience. And addiction in various forms, whether to alcohol, drugs, money, the internet, sex, everything, food. We had a discussion earlier today, which is really, really interesting on this very topic. We're looking at something that is happening, a crisis of the human person. That is, one shouldn't say things like this because they're too extreme. But I don't think this is precedented. I don't think there is a precedent in human history for what is happening to the human person because of the human person's own weakness or inability to understand what life really is. I don't think this happened before. Because if you go back, and for the reason that, even in my own country in Ireland, my father's generation, 30 years ago, God was obvious. Now, people would sort of condescendingly say, this is a simplified, very simplified God. Maybe it was, but maybe God needs to be simplified. Maybe there's nothing simpler than God. Now, this culture has flipped over and like God seems the most implausible thing you could possibly think of. Only an idiot, the culture says, could believe in these things. And yet nobody can explain how they got here, other than to quote Charles Darwin. And I say to people, well, Charles Darwin, yes, I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm not contradicting Charles Darwin about anything. Maybe Michael might like to try that. But what I do say is this to people, to audiences, again and again and again. I am quite prepared to accept that Charles Darwin explained every single one of you, but he doesn't explain me. And I think that's probably true of every one of you as well. That he explains your biological reality, but he doesn't explain how you have a consciousness that looks out for the first time on history, from in here as opposed to out there, from in here, looking out and asking, what the hell's going on here? That Charles Darwin did not explain that. Mm-hmm. And nobody can.
It seems to me important, and we did speak about this yesterday, to have a clear grasp of the culture we live in and of its origins. In the 16th, 17th century, a new conception of knowledge came to be. Pope Benedict talks about this in detail in Spe Salvi, many other authors. A new conception of knowledge where knowledge is ordered to power. De Tocqueville, in his book Democracy in America, says, the Americans don't read Descartes, but they follow his precepts exactly. And the foundation of Descartes' thinking is, instead of the merely looking philosophy and theology, we should come up with a practical philosophy by which, knowing the properties of bodies, as well as we know the powers of our workmen, we can use all bodies around us and make ourselves masters and possessors of nature. In that conception, all external things that I meet, that I run into, are at root material to be manipulated for the improvement of the human condition. So there's something positive in there. There's a hope of improvement. But what gets squashed in that way of looking at the world as material to be manipulated is the sense of wonder in front of things, the sense of mystery that events, other persons are profound. We grasp their ungraspability. That's a positive characteristic. And that depth is that we meet in, especially in other people, but in the world in general, in the beauty of nature. That depth gets eliminated. Charles Darwin, you mentioned him, in one of his letters said, whenever he sees a peacock feather, he gets sick to his stomach. It's a remarkable thing, because a peacock feather is an amazingly beautiful thing. Why does he get sick to his stomach? It's the opposite. It shouldn't be that beautiful. It should just be useful for the multiplication of the races, of the race of the peacocks.
It's unnecessarily beautiful.
Unnecessarily beautiful. So that beauty can't be received as a gift, but it has to be shoved aside. That's the tragedy of our age. Depriving us of the possibility, not altogether depriving us, but at least tendentially, it's a kind of army marching into our hearts to suppress more and more the sense of wonder in front of things, which is the very root of positivity.
That finds its origin in reality itself. At least if I follow your argument before, so like this sense that reality is concrete and therefore given, therefore joyful. So like would it be right to say that the crisis of our time is that we are no longer looking at reality? Right. Or that we are no longer capable of engaging with it?
Yes.
We're looking at a reduced reality, a mechanism, a machine. So we ourselves are biochemical machines. Sex is cells touching cells. That's it.
You know, yes, wonder, as Michael says. I mean, that's the key. Giussani had a phrase which he used repeatedly, and I'm not sure where it came from. I did hear, I can't remember. Only wonder knows. Only wonder knows. So unless you are wondering, unless your response is defined by wonder, then you do not know what you are looking at. You cannot know what you are looking at. And that's, you know, on page 100 of the, I always say to people, you know, who have difficulty with Giussani, they say that his books are difficult or whatever, I say, you know, just read page 100 of The Religious Sense, and you've got about 3/4 of it right there. This terrible blasphemy, I know, but...
Giussani for Dummies?
yeah.
Page 100.
Yeah.
Usually it's 101, 101.
Yeah. But that line, which opened the encounter last night, TJ from Los Angeles read it out. Picture yourself being born, coming out of your mother's womb at the age you are now, at this very moment, in terms of your development and consciousness, and so on.
Fantastic passage.
Amazing. That he, and then he goes on, I came across an extension of that where he talks about in order to address God, saying, God of heaven and earth, you must have experienced it already. You can only start from the experience of this God, of this strange, unimaginable reality that you cannot define. If you have never asked yourself, how did reality, all of this, come to be? Who made it? You have never asked yourself this. You are like an innocent child, or like an illiterate child in front of a text to be read. And you see, a lot of the time with Giussani, he's actually nudging us towards looking at something in the world that is problematic. Like even the title of this, reality has never betrayed me is a real provocative assertion, because it makes you stop. You think, well, why should it? And then maybe it does it all the time. He's responding to an unasked question, as it were, or a question that hasn't been articulated. And here he's doing the same thing. He's actually drawing our attention to the fact that almost universally, including among religious people, when we are asked to discuss ourselves or our place in the world, we start, or our place in reality, we start from a place in the man-made world. We place ourselves in where we have arrived, taking for granted everything that came before, including our generatedness, our givenness, all of those things. And we start to go out as though I had always sat in this chair. And therefore, I could begin with what I am here now. John Waters. What's that? What's John Waters? I mean, I can fall into the habit of my name being related to my body, as I have. But what's that? There's something behind it. And he's pushing us back to look behind. Look behind you. Look behind you. Like in a pantomime, look behind you. There's something else. You're forgetting. And so he's dragging us back out of the world so that we can see ourselves outside it. Just in that instant before we enter it, almost. And you walk onto as we walk onto the stage and say, whew, what's this? He wants to bring you to that moment. And only in that moment, in front of reality, can you feel knowledge. Can you understand really who you are, and what the world is, and how you fit into it? This is amazing. Nobody else has said this, as far as I know. It's astonishing observation because it's a trick you need to do. It's like an exercise. You need to do it 3 times a day or something. Because you need to be constantly reminded that this is the reality of your life. This is the only reality. That this is not, the bunker is not the reality. But you can survive the bunker if you know this.
Bringing it from the, let's say, from the negative point of view, and just to summarize it a little bit, you two are basically saying that if I were to, I'm going to use this expression, embrace reality for what is, in the concreteness of its existence, that I will be led into a path of awe, of gratitude, which, as a way of expressing reality, has never betrayed me. Yet, as you were saying, Michael, our tendency is not to let ourselves go into this path, but to somehow garnish control over what the next step is. You were saying before, and in doing so, I lose the concreteness of reality. I'm nowhere and everywhere at the same time. I'm not able to embrace anything. No? I live in a bunker of images. Why, not only why, but how did we get to that point there in which we no longer have the energy or the courage to allow ourselves to go into this path? And this was not a prepared question.
Yeah,
but I thought it came out very nicely.
Fantastic question. Fantastic question. In the founders of the modern project, Francis Bacon, René Descartes, but there were many at the time, it seems to have been exactly the experience of the suffering of the human race that was a catalyst for them. They wanted power over nature to improve the human condition. And that's understandable. I think every life has intense suffering in it. You can be, say you love somebody, and they betray you. At least in that sense, one piece of reality can betray you. That's a profound suffering. then it's important to recall two things when you experience that suffering. Two things that lead you away from simply manipulating the object so that it conforms to what you want. One point is that no pain is possible without a prior positive love. All pain is rooted in something positive. That at the root of the human heart is the desire for happiness and for a complete happiness. It's only in that positive context that pain can in fact arise, and that's why pain can remind you of the deep desire for happiness. But then another thing, a second thing which the experience of pain can recall, as I was preparing for the meeting today and we had been thinking about along similar lines, in Scripture, the prophet Jeremiah, if you've seen his image in the Sistine Chapel, it's one of the darkest images ever created of a human face. He says about God, "You have deceived me, you have duped me, you have brought me into a trap." His suffering was intense. Nobody believed him. Book of Job is another example. It begins in a rather pious way. Job says, if we accept good things from God, why shouldn't we accept bad things? But then he and his friends are together in silence for 7 days. They don't speak a word. And then Job begins, "Perish the day on which I was born, and the night that told of a boy conceived." He wants to undo his own existence. These elements in Scripture, as a Christian, one can make sense of them only in light of Christ. That is, ultimately, this positivity vis-a-vis reality can only be maintained if Christ is experienced as the Redeemer, as the one who overcomes evil at its root. It would be very easy to become hopeless without that.
Which reminds me of something that I've heard you say before, because if you cannot hope or experience God, because ultimately you too are saying this, if I am led into this path of engaging with reality as is, this path of wonder and gratitude, I really have the need to have a very concrete certainty that is leading me somewhere good.
Right.
Especially when I'm going through moments of deep contradiction in the form of suffering. So I can see, I've heard you speak of this sense of like this need to almost substitute God with oneself.
Yes.
So it's not so much the problem of like making God abstract or forgetting about him, but that I have to become God.
Yeah, this is something I stumbled across. I mean, sometime before I encountered Giussani's writings, I had an experience in which I had a kind of an experience of the same thinking, but in a more kind of artificial way, maybe, or constructed way, with Alcoholics Anonymous, because I am an addict, and I went into Alcoholics Anonymous reluctantly, as everybody does. And I also, when I encountered the first idea of God, the higher power, I didn't want to hear about that. which is almost a defining characteristic of an addict. Because I thought it was a moralistic proposal to make me better, and therefore that it required, that, to put it like this, that I'd basically front-loaded all my fun, and the rest of my life would be on my knees. And that didn't seem an attractive proposition. Even in the interest of saving my life, it still didn't seem attractive. But as I went on, I hung around because I didn't have a lot of choices. And I began to see that no, that actually what was being proposed to me was what we've been talking about, the restoration of the circuitry of my existence, which was the relationship with God, with the force that generates me. And the full realization of that to put me back on that path towards my correct destiny. That's roughly in a very short. It takes about 25 years to learn all that stuff in AA. But
You already have the manual and everything.
I have a diploma and all that. Yeah. But it's very interesting, when you actually think of addiction, and I talked earlier about this moment and we are in the world, that we seem to be in a new phase. People talk, I think, a little bit complacently that all these things always happen through history. I think that we are actually in a new phase of history in relation to the condition of the human person. And there are various ways you could actually talk about it. But I think, and also various symptoms which you could see. One of the problems is that our culture instantly pathologizes all the symptoms. So they look like they're new diseases or new illnesses, depression, alcoholism, so on, overeating. When in fact they are spirituals of the spiritual malaise, they're symptoms of the spiritual malaise that we suffer from. And it's very interesting. In the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous started in America about 80 years ago. And there was at the time very little literature around, at the very beginning. There are lots of books now, the Big Book and so on came later. But one of the texts they used was a German book with the title Not God. Not God, which sounds like a very inappropriate title for a book for a spiritual program. But the point of it was to say to the addict, to begin with, because addicts have a problem believing in God. It's almost a defining characteristic, as I say. There's a chapter in the Big Book, We Agnostics. So it's not a coincidence that I was an agnostic going in. And the point is to say to the addict, okay, God, let's leave God. Let's talk about the higher power. You need to. And let's talk about, and the higher power can be your dead grandfather, it can be the light bulb, it can be the group, whatever. But the first lesson, the very first thing in here is you are not God.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
You are not God. That's the fundamental lesson. Now, that's coming out of our society and all of its thinking. To say that seems, whew. You think, what are you talking about? I never said it. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Because that's the condition of being the addict. Because of the desire to control the world. Because the problem with being God, making yourself God, kicking God off the throne and taking over, is that suddenly you're shouldered with all of the responsibilities of God and none of the power. And what is your response to that? Terror. And what's the solution to terror? Alcohol, drugs, food, anything to numb the pain of the responsibility. Because suddenly you are in a random, chaotic world in which you must organize and take responsibility for all your life. And the greatest, like the last discussion last night, the actor Richard, is it? Yeah, he uses the word that jumped out, surrender. That's the word. Surrender. That's what I had to do. And it's an amazing thing. Because all the culture works on you to tell you, don't surrender, don't surrender. Don't debase yourself. Don't abject yourself. Don't humiliate yourself. Like, I told them to tell this story. I probably told in New York before, but I had to learn to pray again in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't remember many prayers from my childhood by the time I got there, but I had a few, and I said a few, then some new ones, Serenity Prayer. And, there's all these old gurus, like a bit like CL a bit, they're always going around asking you, how are you doing, you all right? Yeah. You on the program? Yeah.
Are you God today? No? Good.
And this guy says to me, how do you pray? So I said, well, I have some prayers, I say them. He says, yeah, but how do you pray? Where are you when you pray? I says, around the house in the morning before I go out. Okay, he says, yeah, are you on your knees? And I said, no, absolutely not. No. Why not? And I said, well, I can't. My knees won't bend. My knees won't bend. It's impossible. And this was actually true in the sense that even in my own house with the door locked and nobody for half a mile around, I still could not get on my knees to pray after those years in the culture of freedom and, independence and whatever else. And he said, we've met guys like you before. But can I just want to, he says, we've got a solution. We've got a solution. He says, tomorrow morning when you're putting on your shoes, I want you to take one of your shoes and throw it under the bed. And you'll find that you have to get on your knees to retrieve it. And when you're down there, say those prayers. Now, do you see the force of the culture in that story? I mean, it's probably not entirely literally true that my knees would not bend. But in every sense other than the absolute physical sense, it was true. I couldn't bear it. But yet, when I got down there and did it, I think, that's not too bad. I remember doing that before. And then after doing it a few times, you realize I feel better than I felt for a long time. Why? Because I've restored the circuitry. I am now in my correct demeanor towards the path and towards the infinite and towards the force that generates me, which is God or Christ. So I'm in harmony with the world, with my Creator, and with myself. And that's the process. Now in AA, that was a kind of a mechanical process. I always think of it as being like a psychological program dressed up as a spiritual program, because it is somewhat mechanistic. Mm-hmm. It was only when I kind of outgrew it at a certain point, and almost immediately after talk again about the path, almost immediately after outgrowing it, and I stopped going to meetings to an extent. I felt I'd heard everything I needed to hear. Almost immediately, I encountered Dasani, the next stage of the journey. And this is what happens, in my experience. Everything. Circumstances are given to us. It seems fantastic, given the culture we've come through, that what happens to you, the person you meet out there, is meant for you now. There's something you should pay. Stop. Don't think, I should be in my hotel, it's time for dinner. No, stop. This is important. This is what Dasani teaches me. Pay attention to everything that happens, because this is your path. And once you find it, things start happening real fast. Once you start, because it goes with the pace you take. And as soon as you are through one phase, you meet the next one straight away. And the longer you take, the more time you need to spend. This seems fantastic. In terms of the positivistic, rational logic of our time and our place, it is utterly fantastic. It is utterly incredible. It is utterly implausible. In terms of the experience which I can bear witness to, and which I've heard from many, many people, it is absolutely true.
As a way of illustrating what you were saying, it occurred to me, I've been studying John Paul's theology of the body for quite a while now, and in the course of it, studied what Immanuel Kant has to say about sex. It's very interesting because it's so symptomatic. He's one of the most penetrating minds who ever lived, and articulated the certain principles of modernity in a unique way. According to him, and in that respect he resembles John Paul, sexual intercourse between man and woman involves a gift of self. But that is contrary to the dignity of the person, because the person belongs to himself. So every act of sexual intercourse is a human rights violation. The function of marriage, then, is you acquire in a permanent way the one who episodically possesses you and thereby gain yourself back. You gain back your autonomy. So it would be something like somebody who loves to gamble but is afraid of losing a huge amount of money, so he buys the casino. Because then if he loses the money comes back to him and he regains it. It's an astonishing conception of marriage that highlights, it's not exactly that you go on your knees in front of your wife, although reverence is a fundamental thing between spouses. But it's a similar blockage.
Yes.
You're both affirming this idea that the correct human position is that of surrender, which is a powerless position. In a culture, it's a very countercultural concept or idea. In a world in which we are always worried of, and I like this image that you were giving us, of I take God's place, meaning I am the one who secures that the path that I'm living is going to take me to a good place. I relinquish my power, that's what you're saying. And we enter into a dynamic of powerlessness, surrender, begging, therefore even obedience. So like you're talking about words, and I like what you are saying, Michael, so like this, of things, of words that are almost recalling you to a losing of yourself. In that sense, a human rights violation. You are completely emptying yourself in order to be yourself.
Yeah.
How is that possible for anyone? Because if you were to say, even to me, or if we were to say to one another these things, and look in your life, what sustains a person in a journey to actually engage into a dynamic of this caliber? Because you are saying it is a beautiful thing, but how does that become not only a promise, but something that I can actually engage on?
Well, first of all, it tends to work very quickly, in my experience, which again furthers the process of verification that this is actually, it's almost like if you're trying to repair the engine of your car and you're doing something wrong, and nothing happens. As soon as you get on the right path, everything feels right. And it's like any job, it's like that. The pieces are fitting together now differently and better. And so the idea of the surrender, it's frightening from the other side of it, because you're so, giving up your drug or your addiction is frightening also, because by definition you think it is the end of the world if you can't drink anymore. You really do, you absolutely believe that. With alcohol, with drugs, I guess, with everything else. I was never a drug addict, but alcohol is a drug, of course, but in the other sense. And so the only way that you can do it is because you're in such a terrible state. AA talks about rock bottom, where you get to the very bottom. The indicator is, or the catalyst is actually shame. And it relates to that idea that Benedict talked about, that you become dissimilar to yourself. And when you get to the point where you're so dissimilar from yourself that you don't any longer recognize yourself, you can't live with yourself, then you act. Then you have to act. And that's a major propulsion, to do something which is actually on the face of it deeply unattractive, implausible, and almost like the end of your life as you knew it. To actually, if you've been 20, 30 years as an agnostic, atheist, drinking from bar to bar, and you're told the only future lies in your relationship with God. As I said earlier, it seems in the language we use for these things, as it hits the ears of the alcoholic, it seems like a very poor deal. But actually, you find that very, very quickly, AA actually says to you, because of course skepticism and lack of taking this seriously is a real problem. They say, fake it till you make it. So if you can't pray, say the prayers anyway. If you can't pray, they say like there's really only 2 prayers you need to start, and they have just ask for help in the morning and say thanks at night. And if you want to say just help, thanks, that's not a bad start. And then you gradually, day by day, the day at a time, very important. You don't have to worry about tomorrow, you don't have to worry about yesterday. Friday week is not important today. To get from the help to the thanks, that's the project each day. But actually, as you put those days one in front of the other, you very soon realize that actually there's a harmony. You don't use that word, but if somebody asks, how do you feel? Okay. Feeling better? No worse. But then maybe a month down the road, you say, yeah, I am better. It is better. And so there's a phrase in the book, in the big book, says that we soon realized that God was doing things for us that we couldn't do for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So the surrender is, there's another that they say to you, what you have to do is, what I did was I resigned as chief executive of John Waters Incorporated. and I became the janitor. So I just turn up for work and see what's to be done. And everything. I mean, this is, we actually think about reality. We think about reality. You think about your life. There are certain things you have to do. But actually, on a given day, there's not that many, perhaps, for most people, that you really have to do. And particularly if you're in a situation which is stressful. I mean, I've been in legal situations, and which terrified me since I went on this path. And they were absolutely scarifying. But I would implement this program each day, and the fear would lift from me. And I would get through them in a way that defied my own sense of my own powers, because it wasn't my own powers. I had given it over. And all I did was, if there's something to do with this that I must do today, write a letter, ring my lawyer, whatever it was, just 1 or 2 things, and then get on with my other things. Somehow, somewhere else, by some parallel process, things were changing. And I wasn't interfering. I wasn't getting in God's way, is the way they put it. I wasn't tripping God up. And I come through, and I can't explain why. And the result, always, is better than the one I would have orchestrated. This is so true in everything I have found since I've been through innumerable crises since, to do with my daughter and legal problems. And thank God she's now 20 and she's studying in Paris and she's great. But there were some hellish times. I've had some hellish times in the last few years, And by the way, in all of this you can swear as much as you like. There is no necessity to be pious about it, like Jeremiah and Job, you can tell God off, and
it's always better to actually do it to God than to do it to yourself.
Yeah.
It fills you with anxiety.
Hello. I know this sounds mad to people who live in the bunker, who haven't really allowed themselves, who have accepted the reason of the bunker.
The bunker.
Yeah, actually.
Fantastic image.
It's a fantastic image. And I want to say something about this. I hope I can find it now in my notes. Giussani actually talked about the bunker before Benedict. He didn't use the word. But I want you just to read. Somebody sent me this, and it's really amazing. About reason. It's about reason. He says, If we understand it as the measure of reality, our conception of reason is confined, as if we were talking about a room. No matter how spacious we wish to make the room, insofar as it remains a room, it is delimited and destined to become a tomb in which man remains imprisoned.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Reason, as the measure of all things, and thus man as the measure of reality, is in fact a prison. Beyond its walls there can be nothing else. Man, the measure of all things, is a being who encloses himself inside a horizon, rendering all of life's novelty impossible. If that which my measure cannot measure does not exist, then all novelty is merely apparent, something formal, like I think he means Lego toys that children play with. They can change the formal construction, but the pieces making it up will always be the same. When reason remains a room, its power is destroyed, and all of life's adventure, its discovery and creativity are put to death.
Well, fantastic.
Fantastic. You know, I mean, I always tell people, you know, that Ratzinger was a few years younger than Giussani and was a fan and took in a great deal of the things that were being said. And, you know, I think this is a great wisdom about reality, about my reality in reality, which everybody should have the right to know. It's a crime against a human being that they are deprived of knowing of Giussani.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give them a hand.